Well, joining me now in the studio is Basil Al Askari. He is the CEO of MidChains. They're based right here at ADGM. And his virtual asset trading platform is the only Emirati-founded exchange of its type in Abu Dhabi. And they are backed by the sovereign wealth fund Mubadala. Basil, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Okay, walk me through this just so we can give our viewers an idea of how one trades and operates crypto in the UAE, because you can be based right here in a free zone, ADGM, but also you can be based in Dubai, but not in the DIFC.
Thanks, Hadley. Thank you very much for having me. And I'd like to say also, we're also backed by ADQ, so we've got both of the sovereign wealth funds behind us.
So you've got a lot of confidence locally.
Yes. So in terms of the landscape as it relates to regulatory in the UAE, ADGM obviously was the first free zone to issue licenses and regulate crypto. This came out in the summer of 2018.
Yeah.
That's around the time we started applying for our licenses and eventually went live with both our exchange and our custody business over here. So Dubai has issued licenses now from VARA, which is based in DWTC, and as well in DMCC. We have a presence in both and good relationships with all of the free zones all around. The difference between them, though, is that in Dubai, the ultimate regulatory authority that governs those two particular free zones is ESCA, which is the federal authority, whereas ADGM regulates by itself.
Right. So basically, you've been able to really work on the legislations within ADGM to be based here.
That's right.
Which has been key, frankly. When you think about what happens right now in the crypto space, obviously what's happening in U.S. markets, what's happening with the stronger dollar, all of these things are weighing on sentiment, also the broader questions about China and the energy space as well. Where do you see crypto headed?
So broadly, this is obviously not financial advice, but I think that crypto is tracking with the rest of the markets. Yeah. This is interesting because a few years ago, the thesis was that crypto was acting as a hedge. Today, I believe the correlation is coming from more institutional capital flowing into the space. And in general, risk assets are not performing as well as one would hope at this point in time. But I think it's normal for markets to have downturns and to eventually bounce back, given all of the policy that's happening, particularly in the U.S., as it relates to strengthening the dollar.
Yeah, so what's the biggest hurdle, do you think, at this point for the crypto space? Because I talk about regulation so often with my colleagues back in the U.S., in Washington specifically. You've got to understand this to regulate it, one would hope, but we do understand that policymakers don't necessarily still really understand the space.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's regulation. So regulation is going to be the biggest factor as it relates to adoption, both from an investor perspective, whether that's institutional or retail, but as well from a corporate perspective to use different technologies to enable Web3 within, for example, things like marketing, things like memberships, things like different business models that could utilize Web3 to enhance their business model.
And what you guys do is provide the services, not necessarily trade the coin.
So it's the infrastructures. So MidChains doesn't necessarily trade itself from ADGM. What we do is
bit of a safer bet, that, don't you think?
Yeah. So what we do is provide custody, which is, in my view, one of the most important aspects, particularly as it relates to bringing on institutions, and providing a safe, a fair, and orderly exchange for institutions as well as retail investors to trade.
Yeah, and that's something that, frankly, we've heard from the Abu Dhabi government multiple times, is that they really want to become a center for cryptocurrency trading, no?
Yes, that's right. And I think that's where the regulation came into play early on. But I think ultimately on a global scale, because this technology is by its nature decentralized, there is dependencies on where regulatory policy heads in other parts of the world.
Yeah, and just before I let you go, in terms of what happens next, lots of questions, frankly, about not just the regulatory framework involved, but also in terms of the necessary questions about bad actors in this space. Now, UAE specifically is a country that has been working very, very diligently, I understand, from government sources to make sure that transactions that happen in this country are very transparent, as in we are not going to be a center for money laundering anymore. How difficult is it as a crypto trader or as a crypto company or anything related therein to get into business here as a result of those kinds of regulations? Because there is a lot of pressure on the crypto coins, no? To not be a part of nefarious dealings, if you will.
So that's a very interesting question, because I think there are obviously bad actors everywhere in the world doing all kinds of different things in financial services. Crypto is no exception, and has had a reputation historically for attracting those kinds of investors. Yeah. I think that the downturn in the market has had a silver lining, and that silver lining is that a lot of the bad actors have sort of been pushed out. In a sense, it's not as attractive to them to use this asset class anymore. In addition, we have implemented, as well as many other firms in the space, interesting technology as it relates to AML and anti-money laundering checks, which allows us to scan and screen incoming cryptocurrency into our custody to be able to at least gauge a risk profile to determine whether or not we're comfortable accepting that as a deposit.
Yeah, so actually potentially making it even more of a safe environment.
That's right.
Basil, we're going to leave it there. Great stuff as always. Can't wait to hear more of your news.